"Hey, old man, what are you doing lost here? This is real Navy territory." A burst of laughter erupted, thick with mockery. The man halted. He said nothing. He merely rolled up his sleeve. Deep, craggy scars stood out under the cold light. No one knew that those scars had once made his name appear in a top-secret report. They only saw an old fellow with a shabby cloth sack wandering into a realm of power and technology. But the moment the defense system was hacked and the entire network went down, it would be that very old man who'd saved the fleet with the same hands that had nearly been severed in a mission no one dared to mention. "Hey, old man, what are you doing crawling out of the mud like that from World War I?" A young SEAL's voice rang out, followed by smug laughter. The man in question didn't turn around. He just kept walking, slowly, his boots tapping lightly on the metal floor of the UAV hangar as if he heard nothing. The silvery scars on his left arm became visible when his sleeve slipped down a map that no one cared to read. His name was Mark Riley. On paper, a logistics advisor. In real life, quiet and austere as the terrain he once marched across. No rank insignia, no unit patch, no one greeting him. Here at Coronado Base, where these young SEALs thought themselves the world's most modern warriors, Mark was just an outdated old man lost in their system. They called him Old Man Doc. That mocking nickname summed up their prejudice. He was obsolete medical staff, redundant and weak. Mark's presence was like an unnecessary wrinkle on the polished face of the unit. He never responded to their jokes, never tried to make friends, never asked for anything. He simply arrived early, sat at the broken vending machine's adjacent table, opened his old laptop, and observed everything in operation, and no one understood why. And they paid him no mind. Everything here ran on merits, digital signals, and authority. In that environment, silent people like Mark were easily deemed invisible. His only role, administration. A technical waypoint before being reassigned somewhere else. Up in the deck office, Captain Hernandez, in charge of logistics, flipped through Mark's file and shrugged. A former medic turned civilian, I guess. Probably a combat doc back in the day. Now he's only fit to make coffee. He didn't read further. The file was exactly 3 lines long. No combat record, no recommendations. Only a transfer order from the Pentagon and a signature. To the captain, Mark was no different than a spare table. No need to dismantle it. No one leaned on it. "Let him sit," he ordered briefly. "Just don't let him touch the kids' drones." And he promptly forgot that Mark existed. But none of them knew that Mark had done far more than his paperwork suggested. No one knew about that night in Kunar, when he single-handedly maintained comms for a surrounded SEAL team, or that deepest scar on his bicep from a bullet that passed through the young Marine he shielded to save. Mark never spoke of it. No one asked. He sat at that worn table, fingers scrolling through lines of technical data as if reading a dying heartbeat. Yet his gaze never wavered. It did not belong to the world of forms and credentials. It belonged to the battlefield where nobody asks, "What can you do?" but only, "Did you survive?" And he did survive. Have you ever known someone ignored by an entire base until that very person saves them all? Don't go away, because you're about to witness such a story, beginning right here in this room filled with mocking laughter.
Welcome to Veteran Life Stories, where real sacrifice meets unforgettable storytelling. Subscribe and keep their courage alive.
The afternoon cast long shadows across the hangar floor as training ended. The mocking laughter retreated to the chow hall, leaving behind a silence both excessive and rare amid the military's rhythm. In that void, Mark appeared so quietly, as if he had always been there, only everyone else just hadn't seen him. He didn't head back to his quarters. Instead of turning left toward the pier, he walked deeper into the row of old drones, the area few visited except maintenance crews. In a hidden corner, under a silver tarp and beside a few rusted parts crates, lay what the technicians jokingly called the ghost bird, an early model scan eagle. Its hull was cracked, paint peeling, wires exposed where they shouldn't be. A machine forgotten, if not abandoned. Mark stopped before it as though greeting an old friend. He reached out and touched the nose of the aircraft, his fingertip tracing the cold metal shell like reading a letter written in steel. The scratches on the fuselage felt strangely sentient. They weren't random. They spoke their own language, like scars on a human body. He made no inspections or notes. He simply stood there, silently, bowing his head as though listening to a heartbeat long since stilled. A young technician, Seaman Diaz, happened by and froze. He'd never seen anyone linger so long before a broken drone. To them, it was nothing more than scrap awaiting teardown. But Mark stood as if in solemn remembrance. Half curious, half teasing, Diaz ventured, "You planning to fix it or pray for it to come back to life?" Mark didn't answer immediately. Sea breeze slipped in, skimming the plane's contours, sighing softly through a hastily patched hole in the wing. Then he turned, his eyes neither smiling nor cold, only as calm as stone, as resolute as a lock with no need for explanation. "History," he whispered. "Every iron bird has a past. This one left all of it outside." Diaz looked closer. Beneath the sleeve that had slid down, Mark's left arm bore a nearly distorted tattoo, a stylized black bird, its ink partially swallowed by a raised scar running like a slash across it. Diaz couldn't say why he shivered. Maybe it was the tattoo. Maybe it was the scar. He'd seen many tattoos, skulls, anchors, Latin quotes, but this was different. It didn't belong to barracks or the dock. It felt like a marker, a code that only those in the know could name. Something so quiet, so certain, that Diaz found himself speechless. Mark lowered his hand and walked away, saying nothing more. He didn't need to. Sometimes the most meaningful stories are the ones never told. From that day on, Diaz began to notice Mark more. He saw that Mark didn't just observe, he understood. Understood how a device shutters when overloaded, why an extra line of code can break a system, even when to remain silent, and when to quietly fix a tiny fault without anyone noticing. Those small gestures, no mere administrative advisor could pull off unless they had once helped build those very machines. The more Diaz watched, the more he realized some people survive not to flaunt their deeds, but to prove that their survival mattered. Could that old drone be just junk? Or the first clue to a story the whole base had forgotten? In the next chapter, you'll discover secrets not in any file, but etched in flesh and metal. If you've ever stood in a Navy command center during a major exercise, you'd know the feeling. Cold white lights, machinery beeping, screens glowing like a city in the dead of night, and people who don't sleep. Everything is planned down to the second. There's no room for error, no tolerance for an old man who worked with machinery decades ago. But that day, things began to go wrong in just 12 seconds. The joint blue versus red drill took place about 40 nautical miles offshore. At the temporary command post aboard the USS Anchorage, surveillance drones had taken off smoothly. The control interface displayed crisp overhead images. Blue sea, maneuvering formations, a flawless performance. Captain Hernandez stood behind his technicians, arms crossed, his gaze sharp enough to pierce every pixel. Then suddenly, the image jittered. A data block streaked across the screen like the first hot breeze of summer. A warning line popped up, then another. In under 30 seconds, the entire interface had burned red. Connections glitched. Drones went dark. The system seemed to have been switched off, all at once. On-duty sailors scrambled. A young technician pounded the keyboard at random. Another tried to reboot the orchestrator but was denied access. Breaths grew heavy. Cooling fans whined mockingly. "We've lost the network. Total control is gone." a lieutenant yelled, ripping his headset off as though it were on fire. Captain Hernandez lunged forward, clutching his radio. "Who's going to save us now? I need electronic warfare answer." His voice was harsh and dry, carrying the pressure only those timed to microseconds by the military understand. And then, in the midst of that chaos, Mark stood up. No dramatic fanfare, no action movie cutaway, just a gaunt old man walking through the control center as if no one could stop him. No one signaled him, no one called him, but no one moved fast enough to block him. Mark passed the young, panicked officers. He walked neither too fast nor too slow, just enough that no one could intercept him. He reached the central console where two techs had abandoned their seats in overload. He sat down. His shoulders settled with perfect ease. He bent his wrists, his fingers touched the keys, and then he began. No orders, no protocol, no permission asked. Only the silent performance of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. His hands didn't type. They danced. Commands unfolded in a rhythm no one recognized. Mark didn't navigate the main menus, he dove deeper. Beyond standard interfaces, he summoned the core code. Red icons blinked, then froze. System maps appeared like arterial pathways. Every move he made left a clear trace, switching connections to an analog fallback, isolating the malware in a virtual memory cell, erecting an internal sandbox to lock out any self-destruct loops. The nearby young technician stopped mid-step, unsure whether to watch or learn. It took less than 3 minutes. The screen shifted from red back to green like traffic lights after rush hour. One by one, drones re-established signal, images streamed in steadily, the sea lay calm again. No more alarms, only gasps from those trying to process what they'd witnessed. Mark exhaled as if unburdening a heavy weight. He said nothing, didn't look back. He simply logged out, withdrew his hands from the keys, and stood up, drifting back to the corner as if he'd just gone to grab another cup of coffee. No one laughed, no one joked, and the strangest thing was, no one dared to ask what he'd just done. Only Diaz, the one who had seen the black bird tattoo on Mark's wrist, watched quietly. He wasn't sure what he'd seen, a miracle, a genius engineer, or something greater. Who do you think can save an entire system in 3 minutes? Without looking anything up. In the next chapter, we'll see why not every legend is found in the training manual. Can you guess what happens next? Stay tuned, drop a 1 or comment, "I'm still here," to keep listening. 10 minutes after the system was restored, the silence in the command center was nothing more than a temporary coat of paint. Behind that normalcy, another storm was quietly brewing, this time not from software, but from the air itself. Radio waves began to distort. Drone signals repeated. The footage stuttered. A few drones on the screen started to drift off course, as if being tugged by an invisible thread. The technicians broke into a sweat. Keyboards clicked furiously again. The displays shifted from green to amber, and then a series of alerts appeared. Loss of comms, frequency jam detected. This was no longer a virus, no malware. This was live electronic warfare, designed to attack radio frequencies directly and powerful enough to paralyze any control system relying on digital signals. An old-school frequency hop attack, clever, aggressive, crafted by the very experts the forces once feared. Captain Hernandez spun around, eyes instinctively searching for Mark, but Mark had already risen. He was calmly heading toward the inline phone console, carrying a small wooden clipboard and pencil notes. No one understood what he was doing. No one asked, because this time, everyone waited for him to speak. He stood before the control room like a veteran conductor, about to cue the opening movement, voice deep as an undertow. "Launch Ghostbird, now!" No immediate response. Not because they didn't hear him, but because they didn't believe him. That early scan eagle, the one the tech crew once called flying junk, was their only option? A young officer stammered, "Sir, it's analog. The comm system. Outdated, weak radar?" But Mark didn't look at him. He stared at the flickering, garbled screen as if listening to a language no one else could understand. "Precisely," he said. "It's outside their jamming range." The room held its breath. A silent signal passed through. Then, as if hypnotized by undeniable logic, the entire team sprang into action. The old Scan Eagle was dragged from its dusty corner, battery packs swapped, engines quickly checked, all amid the astonishment of those who had dismissed it as scrap. A freshly commissioned pilot named Whitaker was assigned. His hand trembled as he donned his headset. Mark stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder not to comfort, but to impart decades of hard-won knowledge. "Don't stare at the screen too much," he whispered. "Listen to the engine. Feel it. It's like a real bird. You have to let it fly, not force it." No one knew why they trusted him. Perhaps because earlier, he had pulled this entire room back from the brink. Or perhaps because there was something in his eyes they'd never seen in a lecture hall. The Scan Eagle roared into the sky, jolting violently as it cleared the launch cable. The command center went still. New drones kept losing signal, but Ghostbird kept flying. Its analog transmission, using basic wave propagation, cut through the interference like a blade-piercing fog. Ghostbird's radar captured clear images. It wasn't jammed because it didn't need to decode any data. It simply did what old tech always did: fly, observe, and relay. Mark stood behind Whitaker, hands off, interjecting only with a few brief directives. "Bank 5 degrees left, maintain speed, ignore the screen warnings, trust the flight." One by one, the newer drones reconnected, piggybacking on Ghostbird's signal like dependent links. A network revived not by cutting-edge tech, but by a seemingly obsolete bird that could still soar, and a man who nearly died, saving another aircraft from plummeting. After 11 tension-filled minutes, the command center exploded in spontaneous applause. The same officers who had doubted now looked at Mark as if a living legend had stepped out of myth's sleeve rolled up, the faded bird tattoo glinting under the yellow lights. He nodded once, said nothing, then slipped back to his usual corner. His chair remained, the laptop screen dim like nothing extraordinary had just happened. Do you think something outdated can become a savior? Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, the man once deemed obsolete will force the entire command chain to rethink everything. The silence after victory always tastes strange. It isn't like the coach's cheers on a football field, nor the triumphant laughter of rookies celebrating their first successes. In that command center, when Ghostbird flew through the jamming storm and the network was re-established, not a single person applauded immediately. They simply watched. No one signaled, and no one had been taught how to react to what had just happened. Mark did not stand in the middle of the room. He remained at the edge where he always chose to be. His arms hung loosely, his breath slow, as if he'd merely completed a routine maintenance check. But the soldiers around him were not the same as before. Their eyes had changed. They no longer saw him as a stranger, but as someone who'd been there all along, only they hadn't been mature enough to recognize him. Up on the observation deck, Captain Hernandez stood motionless. He had seen it all, not through reports or cameras, but with his own eyes. A man once dismissed as administrative dead weight, saving the unit twice in succession. Yet what held his gaze was not the action itself, but what lay beneath Mark's rolled-up sleeve. When Mark bent down to help Whitaker verify the signal, his sleeve slid up, revealing something Hernandez never expected to see again in his military career: a blackbird tattoo, bisected by a raised scar every line, as precise as a secret cipher. The captain exhaled sharply. He knew that tattoo, not from training manuals, but from a classified dossier once hand-delivered to the Pentagon over 10 years ago, stamped top secret. Wolfhound. That name went unspoken, but it echoed in his mind like a bell tolling deep beneath the sea. Wolfhound, the covert electronic warfare unit deployed along the Pakistan frontier, where radars failed and maps were estimates. A unit of warriors with no records, no names, only missions. And one day, the entire team was declared missing in action during an undisclosed operation. No one was ever found. Until now. The captain descended the steps slowly, each footfall heavy as if colliding with time itself. When he reached Mark, he said nothing, asked no questions, offered no explanations. His eyes lingered on the arm tattoo, then moved deliberately up to Mark's face, where a long scar crossed the brow, lending Mark's gaze an uncanny calm. Hernandez stood at attention. Although his rank outranked Mark's, he could no longer maintain a rigid command posture. He raised his hand in salute. It was not the formal salute to a superior. It was not a gesture required by regulation. It was the salute of one soldier to another soldier, without regard to rank or position, only character and deed. The young SEALs, the ones who had called Mark Old Man Doc, saw that gesture. They fell silent, no orders given, no prompts needed. Then, one by one, their sense of military pride swelled. They returned his salute, wordlessly, as if it were the only way to apologize and still preserve their dignity. Mark looked at each of them. He neither nodded nor smiled, only a profound gaze, neither reproachful nor boastful, as if he were accustomed to being recognized too late. But there was one tiny moment when his eyes paused on Diaz, and for the first time, people witnessed something like acceptance. Have you ever seen a room fall silent out of respect? In the final chapter, we will see what happens when a legend departs as if he had never existed. Dear audience, grab a glass of water and listen on the twists yet to come will surprise you. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story, so we know you're still here. The sea lay calm at day's end, as though the Pacific itself exhaled a long sigh after the stormy exercise. On the deck of the logistics ship, the sun slid toward the horizon, dragging a pale orange band across the clouds, a beauty visible only when you've survived a day that seemed impossible. Mark did not return to the command center after the salute. He went back to his usual refuge, a hidden corner of the hangar where the Ghostbird drone rested silently as witness to all that had happened. He carried no laptop, no paperwork, only his bare hand, and a look understood by no one but himself. He laid his palm on the aircraft's fuselage, where the worn silver metal reflected the sunset like the weary skin of an old soldier. For a brief moment, every sound around him seemed muffled. No ship horns, no voices, only a soft exhale like wind brushing across his palm. A simple gesture, one hand on a block of iron, but it spoke more than 1,000 thank yous menus. Behind him, hurried footsteps approached and stopped. It was Seaman Diaz. The young man stepped forward slowly, as if afraid to shatter something sacred he could not name. His voice trembled but held firm enough to pierce that hush. Thank you, sir, for today, for not abandoning us. Mark did not turn. He merely tilted his head slightly, eyes still on the drone's body as if listening to its fading heartbeat. Remember, he said in a low, measured tone like waves lapping a ship's side. Don't discard the old, just because it no longer makes noise. Some things weren't made to draw attention, but to endure when they're needed most. Diaz fell silent. He offered no reply. Yet inside him, something shifted like a stone dropped into a deep well, sending ripples through waters he thought had run dry. Mark withdrew his hand slowly, decisively. As his palm left Ghostbird's hull, the blackbird tattoo on his forearm stood clear, concealed no longer, unafraid, unadorned. Simply a symbol, and that was enough. A sea breeze swept the deck, billowing the hem of Mark's battered gray jacket behind him, no different than the resurrected drone itself. In the dimming light, he merged with steel beams and shadows, as if he'd never been there, or as if he'd always been there, and they had only just noticed. No medal ceremony followed. No speeches of praise, but none were needed. The next morning, in the maintenance office, they found a new wooden plaque mounted by the hangar entrance. It bore no name, only a hand-drawn emblem of a black bird. Beneath it, the small inscription, Ghostbird, 1106, forever airborne. No one claimed authorship, yet everyone knew. Diaz paused as he passed, touching that bird for the first time, realizing that a symbol needs no explanation, only preservation. Have you ever watched someone vanish, yet leave behind more than they ever showed in presence? If a small emblem can transform an entire unit's understanding of courage, perhaps we should start paying more attention to those who stand silently among us. Perhaps we've all glanced past someone, a slow-walking old man, a quiet person in the room, or a pair of scar-marked hands, and assumed they had nothing left to offer. But Mark's story reminds us that true value doesn't lie with the loudest voice in the room, but with the one who quietly stays behind when everything falls apart. A symbol doesn't need to hang on a wall. It only needs to live on in the moment when the world needs it most. Thank you for journeying with us to the very end of this story. If this tale brings to mind someone who was once forgotten or stirs something deep within you, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, and pass it along to someone you believe needs to hear it today. And don't forget to follow us, because we have many more true stories, small in scale, but powerful enough to move American hearts.
The phoenix-shaped scar on Naomi Eudora's wrist made Captain Marcus Rivera freeze in place inside a small theater in Memphis. For a moment, time seemed suspended as he recognized the secret emblem of a unit that was never meant to exist. How had this elderly black woman, sitting quietly in the dim shadows, come to carry the mark of missions long buried in classified history? Before we begin this extraordinary journey of courage, betrayal, and justice long denied, hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This story will lead you through government conspiracies, cover-ups, and a battle for honor that is stretched across more than 50 years, and you won't want to miss how a faint scar turned the course of everything. Naomi Eudora lived in silent seclusion in a modest wooden house, a faint shadow drifting through the rhythm of everyday life. At 78, she was still tall, though her steps had slowed. Her back bowed slightly under the invisible weight of half a century's burdens. Her tightly coiled hair had turned the color of fresh snow, her skin lined by time, yet her deep-set eyes carried a gravity that only comes from being forged in the crucible of combat. Her home was its own quiet world, shelves bending beneath the weight of books on military history and biographies of storied generals, yet painfully bare of photographs or personal mementos. Beneath the bedroom floorboards, locked away in a cold steel box, her past lay imprisoned classified documents chronicling the Phoenix Battalion, the racially integrated Special Forces unit the U.S. government insists never existed. Naomi did not truly live. She merely existed. Each morning she moved through the streets of Soulsville, passing indifferent glances as if she were no more than a passing wisp of smoke. Inside her, an invisible wound still bled not from the jungles of Vietnam, but from the deliberate amnesia of a nation that once demanded her courage, exploited it, and then erased her name from its story. The wooden house was both sanctuary and prison. The books, loyal companions, were powerless to calm the storms in her sleep. Night after night she woke in cold sweat, her hand instinctively finding the phoenix scar on her wrist, the last trace of buried glory. The whirring blades of helicopters, The faces of fallen sisters and brothers dissolving into gunfire smoke haunted her as constant reminders she had survived, but she had never truly lived. She had learned invisibility not by desire, but as a means of survival. She avoided curious eyes, slipped past whispered speculation. She knew attention was a double-edged blade. One careless word, one unguarded gesture could stir the same shadows that had ordered the Phoenix Battalion's erasure. The steel box beneath her floor held more than paper. It held her fear, her grief, and a vow of silence. Not silence from cowardice, but the kind born from seeing the price of truth reflected in the eyes of comrades who never returned. Each day, Naomi endured the smaller, sharper wounds of discrimination. At the bakery on Beale Street, the young clerk brushed past her, greeting warmly only the white customer who just entered. Naomi stood still, hands folded, gaze steady, though her heart ached. She said nothing. 50 years ago, a dusty uniform and medals on her chest hadn't been enough to earn service in a Georgia diner. "Women like you aren't welcome," the owner had spat. Today, the insult came wrapped in quiet neglect and averted eyes, the blade cut just as deep. At the VA hospital, where she sought care for her chronic lung condition, the prejudice was even more tangible. She waited in the corner of the room, her breathing slow and strained, her cough muffled beneath the shuffle of nurses' paperwork. Patients who arrived after her were called in first. Each minute stretched like a verdict. When a nurse finally approached, eyes momentarily soft with regret, the delay had already etched another invisible scar. Naomi simply nodded, lips pressed together, as if endurance were another medal she was expected to earn. Inside her, a war still raged. She longed to speak the truth about the Phoenix Battalion, to name the soldiers erased from the records. Yet fear rooted her silence. What would happen if she spoke? Would the shadows return? Or would she, an old woman who had spent decades in the margins, be erased completely? Still, every night the faces of her comrades appeared before her, their eyes imploring, "Why won't you speak?" Naomi's fingers curled tightly around that burning scar, telling herself that time would heal it. But time had only deepened the dark pit where the truth waited imprisoned, longing for a single ray of light to break through.
Welcome to Veteran Hero Medal, where silent scars speak, honor lives on, and real heroes wear no capes.
Naomi Eudora stepped into the Hadaloo Theater, the soft strains of blues from Soulsville drifting faintly through the walls. At 78, she chose a seat in the far back row, where the stage lights could not touch her, a habit born of decades spent in the shadows. Her long-sleeve blouse draped over her tall yet slender frame, concealing the faint phoenix-shaped scar on her wrist, a mark she had carried in silence for more than half a century. Naomi's deep-set eyes rested on the program for the evening's play about veterans, but her mind wandered far from Memphis, back to the steaming jungles of Vietnam, where the echoes of gunfire and the memory of the Phoenix Battalion still haunted her. She had not come to be noticed, never. Attention was a dangerous thing, a spark that could reignite embers meant to stay cold. Tonight, she simply wanted, if only for 2 short hours, to lose herself in the story of soldiers like her, those who had fought, sacrificed, and then been quietly forgotten. She gripped the playbill, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the storm inside. In her chest, an ache long unspoken swelled, the yearning to speak the truth, to give voice to the names of fallen sisters and brothers, warring with the fear that telling it would summon the shadows she had eluded for 50 years. As the house lights dimmed, a young man entered the theater. His posture was straight, his bearing unmistakably military. Captain Marcus Rivera, 34, fresh from Iraq, his hair cropped close, his gaze sharp as a drawn blade. He had come to honor his grandfather, a veteran saved during the Vietnam War, whose journals whispered of a secret unit known only as the Phoenix Battalion. Marcus settled a few rows ahead of Naomi, unaware of her presence until, in a small, unthinking motion, she rolled up her sleeve to check the program. The Phoenix scar caught the muted light. Marcus's pulse stuttered. His grandfather had sketched that exact emblem in his journal, a symbol of unsung heroes. Naomi felt the weight of his gaze, slicing through the darkness. She tugged her sleeve down quickly, her heart leaping into a rhythm it hadn't known in years. She didn't want to be recognized. But Marcus had seen it, and in him, curiosity flared, an instinct that told him this was no coincidence. He studied her from a distance, noting the stillness in her posture, the gravity that clung to those who had carried too much for too long. The play began only to be pierced by a voice from the audience, sharp and unwelcome. "She doesn't belong here." No reason was offered, but the stares said enough. Naomi's head dipped slightly, her fingers gripping the armrest. The sting was not from shame, but from the old wound tearing open again, that of a woman who had bled for her country, yet still wore the label of outsider. She considered leaving, retreating into the safety of her invisibility, until a new voice cut through the air. Marcus rose, stepping into the aisle. His words weren't shouted, but carried the steel of command. "This woman is a guest, and she deserves respect." The room quieted. Naomi looked up, startled, her gaze cautious. She didn't need rescuing. She had fought her own battles, but something in his defense touched the place in her she thought was long dead, the part that once believed in justice. Their eyes met. Marcus held a silent promise that she would not be forgotten. Naomi inclined her head, her voice low and steady. "Thank you, but I'm fine." Yet she wasn't fine. Her heart raced. Not just from the confrontation, but from knowing that Marcus had truly seen her, the scar, the weight she carried, the life she had tried to keep hidden. She rose and left, her steps faster than usual, as though escaping not just the theater, but the past itself. Still, she knew deep down this meeting had not been chance. Marcus stayed behind, watching her silhouette disappear into the Memphis night. His hand rested on his grandfather's journal, the pages now feeling heavier. Something told him he had just brushed against a secret larger than himself. He made a silent vow to uncover it, despite Naomi's parting words, spoken in a voice lined with warning. "Some truths are best left buried, son." But Marcus could not let it go. Not after seeing that scar. Not after glimpsing the sorrow in her eyes, the sorrow of a hero erased. Naomi Eudora sat in her small wooden house in Soulsville, Memphis. Her hands trembled, slightly worn by age and memory, as they gripped the edge of her chair while she met Marcus Rivera's gaze. The unwavering eyes of the Marine captain had pierced through the shell of silence Naomi had built over 50 years. Beneath it, a quiet storm raged, the fear of exposure tangled with a fierce longing to tell the truth, to speak the names of the Phoenix Battalion soldiers, those the world had willfully forgotten. Yet Naomi knew truth always demanded its price. Under Marcus' steady persistence, Naomi began to open her heart. Her voice was hoarse and low, like wind through the Vietnamese jungle long ago. She spoke of the Phoenix Battalion, an experimental special operations unit formed in 1967, 10 soldiers, 5 black and 5 white, led by Lieutenant Colonel Jeremiah Brooks, a black officer of rare courage and sharp intellect. They moved like ghosts in the night, slipping behind enemy lines to rescue POWs in North Vietnam, where danger crouched behind every leaf. Their success rate far surpassed any other unit, yet their victories were buried in silence. Naomi paused, her eyes misted, as if she could still see the faces of her fallen comrades, those whose names had been erased. The deepest wound had not been the war itself, but the betrayal. Naomi revealed the battalion was disbanded not for failure, but because they had uncovered damning evidence. Colonel Raymond Caldwell, a high-ranking officer, had sold tactical secrets to North Vietnam for personal profit. The documents they seized at an enemy camp reports, letters, pay ledgers, were knives driven into their loyalty. Instead of launching an investigation, the government buried them. Naomi's hand clenched. The phoenix scar on her wrist burned, reminding her of the vow of silence she had upheld for far too long. Following Naomi's lead, Marcus stepped into the tiny bedroom. The wooden floorboards groaned under their weight. Naomi knelt, her hands shaking as she pried up a board to reveal a cold steel box coated in decades of dust. She unlocked it. Each click sounded like the heartbeat of the past. Inside lay buried history. Mission reports stamped in fading ink, photographs of soldiers standing beside helicopters, and an unawarded silver medal lying there in solemn witness to a broken promise. Marcus picked up a photograph, his eyes bright with resolve, but Naomi looked away, her heart heavy. She knew opening this box meant opening a door to danger. Marcus pressed on, reaching out to the surviving members of the Phoenix Battalion scattered across the country, living under new names, new lives. But the past did not release its hold so easily. One evening, as Naomi stood by the window and the curtain shifted in the breeze, she noticed an unmarked black car parked across the street. Its headlights flashed once cold as a warning. Moments later, the phone rang. An anonymous voice hissed, "Stop digging, miss." "Eudora, if you don't want to lose everything." Naomi set the receiver down, her breath uneven, her lungs tightening from the chronic illness that plagued her. She wasn't afraid for herself, she feared for Marcus and for anyone drawn into this storm. In San Diego, Marcus too felt the darkness closing in. Summoned to base, he faced grave accusations, misuse of military databases, endangering national security. His commanding officer, eyes shadowed with regret, advised him to walk away. Marcus stood at attention, but a fire burned within him. He thought of his grandfather, of the journal entries recalling the day he was saved by the Phoenix Battalion. He thought of Naomi, of the depth in her eyes, the eyes of a forgotten hero. He knew he could not stop, no matter the cost to his career or his safety. They began to realize their enemy was not just history, but powerful forces still protecting Senator Raymond Caldwell's secret, a man who now held immense influence in Washington. Caldwell had not only erased the Phoenix Battalion to hide his treachery, he had built an empire on lies and would do anything to preserve it. Naomi sat in the dark, her hand resting on the steel box, wondering if truth was worth the price. Marcus, miles away, gripped the phone, vowing she would not have to fight this battle alone. They were stepping into a new kind of war, not with bullets, but with memory and truth. Deep down, Naomi knew this could be her final fight. She closed her eyes. The faces of the Phoenix Battalion rose before her comrades, urging, "It's time, Naomi." She opened her eyes, steadied her breath, and felt a quiet resolve take root. Dear viewers, take a moment to breathe or pour yourself a glass of water and stay with us, because what comes next will be even more shocking. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always incredible to see our community from around the world. Type 1 if you're hooked, so we know to bring you more untold stories like this one. In the VA hospital room in Memphis, the air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and the steady hiss of the respirator. Naomi Eudora lay on the bed, each breath a battle against the chronic illness that had been chipping away at her strength for years. Her eyes dulled, not from the harsh fluorescent lights above, but from the weight of memory. The Phoenix Battalion, the sisters and brothers who had fallen, the secrets she had carried like a curse. Her fingers clutched the edge of the blanket, her heart beating slow and heavy, wondering if this was the end, if the truth she had protected for 50 years would die with her. Then a tall figure appeared at her bedside, as if he had stepped straight out of the fog of the past. It was Jeremiah Brooks, older now, his silver hair framing a face marked by deep lines, but his posture unbowed. Naomi blinked hard, certain she was seeing a ghost. Brooks, the lieutenant colonel who had led the Phoenix Battalion, had been declared dead in a 1970 explosion in Vietnam, and yet here he was, flesh and blood, his eyes still lit by the fire she remembered. "It's me, Naomi," he said softly, his voice warm but edged with grief. Her chest tightened not from her illness, but from the surge of feeling hope, pain, and a fierce, almost fearful anticipation. Brooks pulled up a chair and rested his hand lightly on her shoulder, just as he had in the blackened jungles decades before when the unit lay silent in the dark. Then he told her the truth. His death had been staged. With the help of a disillusioned CIA operative, he had faked it and gone into hiding in New Orleans under a false identity, living as invisible a life as hers. For 50 years, he had quietly gathered evidence against Raymond Caldwell, the man who had buried the Phoenix Battalion to cover his treason. From the inside of his coat, Brooks withdrew a small hard drive, its surface catching the sterile light like a sliver of hope. Inside, he said, were recordings of Caldwell ordering the destruction of records, financial statements showing secret payments, letters proving he had sold intelligence to North Vietnam. Naomi stared at it, her pulse quickening, as though the buried truth had just risen into her hands. Brooks's arrival was a flicker of light, but also a gust of wind that could fan danger into flames. Naomi's instincts told her so. In her heart, hope tangled with dread. Hope that the Phoenix Battalion could finally be redeemed, dread of the cost. Brooks's gaze held apology and iron resolve. "I've been gone too long, Naomi," he murmured. "But now it's time we finish this." Naomi nodded, though the question weighed in her mind whether she had the strength to see it through. Danger came quickly. Not long after, Naomi's modest Soulsville home was breached, her window shattered, footprints on the floorboards, several documents missing from the steel box. She stood in the wreckage, her hand braced on the window frame, feeling as though the past itself had forced its way inside. In San Diego, Marcus Rivera faced his own shadows. His office at the base had been ransacked. Papers littered the floor in deliberate chaos. It was a warning. Marcus clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing with anger and determination. He thought of Naomi, of Brooks, of his grandfather, saved long ago by the Phoenix Battalion. He knew he couldn't stop, even if it meant the end of his career. The darkness spread to others. In Chicago, Dr. Samuel Hayes received word of an unexpected medical audit, his patient files combed through as if to discredit him. In Miami, explosives expert Luis Navarro was targeted through his family. His son answered the phone to hear strangers say, "Tell your father to back off, or the whole family pays." Navarro had faced bombs and bullets before, but this struck deeper. Still, he would not retreat, not after Brooks's return. They agreed to meet at a remote farm outside Savannah, Georgia, fields stretching to the horizon, far from city lights. Naomi, frail but determined, insisted on going. She carried the steel box in her lap like the soul of the Phoenix Battalion itself. Marcus drove, his eyes sweeping the rearview mirror, alert for any sign of pursuit. Brooks sat in the back, silent but radiating a steady flame of resolve. Each mile closed the distance to the truth and possibly to their final reckoning. Deep inside, Naomi's resolve hardened. If she was to die, she would die for the truth, not in silence. Naomi Eudora sat among the surviving members of the Phoenix Battalion. In her eyes burned a spark of hope she had thought long extinguished. Before them lay their audacious plan to reveal the truth about the Phoenix Battalion in Washington, D.C., at the very event where Senator Raymond Caldwell would speak on national security. Naomi's thin fingers clutched the steel box containing the last remaining documents. Her heart pounded not only from the strain of her chronic illness, but from the fierce knowledge that after 50 years of silence, the truth finally had a chance to break the surface. And yet she knew deep down that every step forward was a dance with death. The team worked without rest. Jeremiah Brooks, calm and decisive as when he once led them through the jungles of Vietnam, assigned each task. They coordinated with Catherine Wells, an investigative reporter from the Baltimore Sun, who had dedicated her career to exposing injustice. Marcus Rivera reached out to veterans organizations ready to amplify their story. Luis Navarro's granddaughter, a sharp, tech-savvy young woman, built an online network to push the evidence across social media. Each member carried their own private fear. Naomi worried for her life. Brooks regretted the decades he had been absent. Marcus feared for his career, but all were united by one belief: the truth could no longer be buried. On the day of the event, Washington gleamed under a blinding sun. Yet tension pressed heavily inside the hall where Caldwell would speak. Wearing a crisp suit and a practiced smile, the senator took the podium, his voice wrapped in patriotic pledges and promises of national security. But beneath his polished words, unease began to stir. He had no idea that from Savannah, the Phoenix Battalion team had set their plan into motion. Catherine Wells's fingers flew over her keyboard as she sent mission reports to major news outlets. The audio of Caldwell ordering the destruction of the battalion's files exploded onto Twitter, spreading like wildfire. Dr. Samuel Hayes's medical records detailing each wound suffered by POWs they had rescued were sent to leading medical journals. Inside the hall, journalists' phones buzzed. Eyes widened as the first headlines lit up their screens. A media storm erupted. A reporter stood, voice sharp. "Senator Caldwell, do you have any comment on the evidence showing you ordered the eradication of the Phoenix Battalion, a unit that saved hundreds of lives?" Caldwell froze. The smile on his face stiffened into something brittle. Another reporter lifted a printed financial ledger. "Can you explain these payments from North Vietnam?" The hall exploded with flashes and voices. Caldwell, once untouchable, began to falter. His explanation stumbled, his composure cracked, and his eyes betrayed panic. Finally, he abandoned the podium, striding away as though chased by the very truth he had buried. Watching live from Savannah, Naomi squeezed Brooks's hand. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. But the fight was not over. 1 week later, the Phoenix Battalion's surviving members entered a congressional hearing room, blinding lights above, cameras aimed at every face. Naomi, though her breathing was shallow, sat straight-backed, her gaze unflinching. Dr. Hayes, his hands shaking from Parkinson's, presented his records, his voice quiet but cutting. Luis Navarro recounted the explosives they set to clear escape routes for POWs. Pride flickered in his eyes. Marcus stood behind them, his own emotions swelling as he watched these forgotten heroes finally step into the light. Jeremiah Brooks took the stand, walking as steadily as he had through the jungle decades before. He opened his laptop and played the recording of Caldwell's cold, remorseless order. Destroy all records. The Phoenix Battalion must never exist. The room froze, then erupted in a wave of outraged murmurs. Brooks met the senator's eyes, his voice calm yet commanding. We did not fight for medals. We fought for the truth. Naomi, seated behind him, felt her chest grow light as if 50 years of weight had been lifted. The public caught fire. On social media, the hashtag #Phoenix Team trended alongside personal accounts of the battalion's missions. Veterans organizations demanded a full investigation. Civil rights groups called for formal recognition of the Phoenix Battalion. Caldwell's reputation collapsed like a sandcastle before the tide. The Senate Ethics Committee summoned him, his powers stripped away until only the man and his crimes remained. Back in Savannah, Naomi sat on the farmhouse porch, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and fire. She thought of her fallen comrades, of the decades spent in silence. Her body was frail, but her spirit had never stood taller. Brooks rested a hand gently on her shoulder. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. They had won not just for themselves, but for every unsung hero whose name had been stolen by silence. 3 months after the storm in Washington, when the Phoenix Battalion was finally and officially recognized, Naomi Eudora, weakened by her lung disease, sat in a wheelchair. Her trembling hands cradled the old steel box. As the president pinned the Medal of Honor to her chest, Naomi looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. Not for personal glory, but for the sisters and brothers who had given their lives posthumously honored that day, their names now carved into history. In her heart, 50 years of weight dissolved, leaving room for peace. At Arlington National Cemetery, a granite monument was unveiled, engraved with a vivid phoenix emblem. Once hidden in shame on Naomi's wrist, it now shone as a symbol of courage, carrying the legacy of the Phoenix Battalion into the light. She touched her scar, feeling the presence of her fallen comrades standing beside her, smiling. She knew then, truth, though buried, will always rise. With the strength she had left, Naomi founded the Phoenix Fund, an organization dedicated to preserving the histories of Black service members and supporting veterans seeking justice. She vowed that no hero would ever again be erased because of the color of their skin. Jeremiah Brooks, the indomitable commander, did not live to see the fund's full work. He passed away from cancer soon after the ceremony, his face serene, like a soldier who had completed his final mission. We did it, Naomi, he had whispered before the end, his hand clasping hers with a steady grip. Marcus Rivera carried the battalion's story forward, sharing it with younger generations. On one visit to see Naomi in Memphis, Marcus's teenage son, bright-eyed and curious, pointed to the scar on her wrist. "What does it mean, ma'am?" Naomi smiled, her voice warm but steady. "It means truth, no matter how deep it's buried, will always find a way to rise like a phoenix from the ashes." Her gaze met Marcus's. In that look was a shared understanding of a journey that had transformed them both. Naomi returned to her small home in Soulsville, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She knew her days were numbered, but she also knew this: the Phoenix Battalion's legacy would endure. Thank you for walking with us through this story. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always inspiring to see people tuning in from all over the world. And if you enjoyed this journey, comment 1 so we can bring you many more stories like it.